Hi everyone, Carmen Zella, Alice Bucknell. Thank you so much for joining, for those that are starting to join this live IG chat. It's funny, I totally lost track of the time because I was actually like engaged giving Alice, yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're not recording this conversation. We should be recording this conversation. Yeah, Alice and I just totally did like a deep dive, which I'm going to rehash for everybody now that this is being recorded. So thank you everybody for joining. We're gonna jump right in with Alice because these IG chats are meant to be pseudo-informal, but really give us an understanding of the artist who is being presented. So Alex is going to be at LUMINEX this year, which we're very, very excited about her project that Alice is going to be presenting there. And it's based on a work that was created initially started in 2022, and then it actually was finished in November of 2023.
The film component, yeah. The game I wrapped up like a couple months ago.
Okay.
It's like pretty fresh.
So this is like what you're going to see at LUMINEX this year, and I'm going to talk with Alice about like Alice's career, and like you're going to be in a residency over in Europe during LUMINEX. So this is a great opportunity for us to be able to do a deeper dive and have Alice like talk about the piece and talk about public art. So I'm going to jump in if that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to start off with just giving the audience and myself a little bit of an inquiry into like why public art? Like what is your interest in creating public art?
Yeah, completely. I mean, this is definitely like in terms of scale, right? Like this is like definitely the biggest like presentation of the work that I've done. I mean, the idea of taking over like in my case the like facade of a parking space, like parking lot, is just like scale wise like gigantic. But I also think in terms of like public art at large, like the accessibility of it is something that I'm really interested in. It's like the idea of like this layering, right? Of like putting this work like temporarily on like a site in LA. Like of course like the project I'm presenting is all about Los Angeles, so it feels like especially meaningful in that regard to like literally have the work existing inside of this like urban context that it's a part of and reflecting on. But yeah, I mean, my work in general, like it's using, you know, like video games and it's like film, like genres that historically have bled out of the art world and are super accessible. Like gaming has this like massive pop cultural appeal. So like I'm really interested in that kind of element of accessibility and like just a wide variety of audiences. I think in LA, like specific contexts, like it's really nice to get people on the street because it's like a city that so often is just like car centric and like I don't know people who like walking around and like experiencing this work like super close up. So
have you ever shown any work or that is like to scale so that people can actually like have a physical experience with it and like kind of walk in or?
No, I mean, honestly, this is my first one, really. It's ironic. It's funny because, like, yeah, like, right after LUMINEX opens, I'll be doing something similar in Madrid at Matadero, which is this beautiful space. It's inside of, like, an old slaughterhouse, so you can imagine, like, gigantic brick walls. Like, so I'm going to be doing something similar where it's, like, multi-channel projection inside of, like, a triple height room basically. So yeah, that's going to be like another, you know, kind of experience where you're like walking inside of it and it's like hyper immersive. But yeah, up until now it's been pretty, like it's ironic considering the scale of the work that I'm making.
Yeah,
it's been pretty like small scale in terms of like presentation. You know?
So talk to us a little bit about the work that you're presenting at LUMINEX. Everything from the title to the adaptation of both the film and like the insertion of the characters in the gaming world.
Yeah.
I'd love to get that.
Totally, yeah. I mean, the project's called The Alluvials, and the name comes from like this type of, I mean, it's very nerdy, but it's basically like in like ecology or like river studies. It's like looking at like the alluvial plain, which is this like wash of sediment that a river leaves behind when it dries up. So it's almost like a fossilized index of the river changing paths, right? Or drying up. And yeah, I mean, the project deals a lot with like LA's relationship to water historically and into the future. It deals a lot with water scarcity, like this fear of drought that's kind of always been part and parcel of like how the city defines itself and exists.
Yeah.
You know, kind of incredibly, like despite like, yeah, and it's looking at sort of like all the sort of economic, legal, political forces that like went into basically like you know, like LA like masterminding this plan for itself to like become a city in the desert, right? And it's really critical of like, yeah, like while acknowledging all of that, like it's very critical of the sort of like colonial and like, yeah, you know, interstate and like international like politics that went into like
The development.
LA what it is today. Yeah.
So some of the sites that you identify in the work are obviously the 6th Street Bridge, the LA River. Can you talk a little bit about like some of the desert scapes and like some of those landscapes that you've...
Yeah, totally. I mean, all my work is like super research heavy, right? So the Illuminals came out of this like, both the game and film came out of this like 4-month long research period where I was just like really heavily like mainlining like all of the LA Public Library's research archives.
Yeah.
So I was looking a lot at like what's called like the water wars in California, and that kind of extends to like Nevada, like to Mexico. Like looking at kind of how LA engineered like through water infrastructure and like political bargaining an entire kind of terraforming, I guess you could call it, like of California. So like, yeah, I mean, LA still gets a ton of its water from the Hoover Dam, and just over the border into Nevada, like around 30 to 35% annually of its like water.
That's significant.
Consumption comes from there.
Wow.
Yeah, so like one of the levels in the video game and one of the chapters in the video piece is set in the Hoover Dam. But like one thing that's, I guess, quite typical of my work is this like layering of different worlds.
Yeah.
So it's simultaneously looking at the Joshua tree, which is an endangered species of yucca that exists out in the desert. It has like one surviving pollinator, the yucca moth. And it's this case of extreme symbiosis. Like if one of them dies, the other one dies. So it's this kind of like ripple effects of like mass extinction. So simultaneously in this level, it imagines the Hoover Dam like dried up. And it imagines the Joshua tree, which, yeah, according to like scientific studies, is trying its best to like move northward, like as far as a tree could possibly move, right? Like it is slowly tracking. Like if you look at the pollination cycles and like where new Joshuas are sprouting, because yeah, like basically.
So where's the furthest that the Joshua tree is tracked that you in your research?
Well, I was out in like California City last week for like new research for a new project. So that's like much further north.
That is.
It's closer to like Fort Irwin, I guess. So yeah, I mean it's there. There are some Joshuas across the border already in Nevada. So like the kind of thing that I'm proposing isn't actually that far off. And yeah, I mean I don't know, like Lake Mead itself, which is like the like artificial lake that the Hoover Dam is built on top of, is also kind of at risk of drying up. So it's like a lot of my work just takes like conditions or like scenarios that feel future adjacent, like they're already kind of happening, and then it just like sort of twists those or like extends those speculations into the future.
So, like with the moth in the Joshua landscape, can you talk about like your character association?
Yeah,
in those landscapes?
totally. Well, so for the game, like each of the game levels, there's like 4 levels. Each of the game levels is kind of reflecting on a different type of video game. So for that level, I'm looking at the first-person shooter, which is like the most popular and also the most violent kind of video game out there. And I'm sort of recasting it as like first-person pollinator. So it's a level where you play either as the tree or the moth. And it's this case of like sort of extreme symbiosis of like the end of the world. Like, you know, the Hoover Dam is totally dried up, like it feels very apocalyptic, and yet like this tree and its like single pollinator has like made it somehow into this like dust bowl, like, into this like ruinscape. And it's just this kind of like, I mean, it's sort of silly. Like, it's this really like multi-species like orgy sort of like,
Yeah.
you know, like what if you play as the moth, like you're basically like embodied, like you're flying through the air and you just have to like leap from tree to tree. Like you have to aim and like, you know, it's like target. It's like a shooter.
Yeah.
But like it's about like sex
Mm-hmm.
and it's about like reproduction and it's about pollination.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like a nice way to kind of like reverse or like challenge some of the obvious and inherent violence to gaming. And then if you play as tree, obviously you can't move because you're a tree, but you are using the microphone and you have to talk to the moth to get it to like come over to you. And
You have
pollinate
to like entice them all.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so it's really silly. Like, I feel like humor is actually like a really big part of my work. Like,
Yeah.
in a way, it's like it is very serious and it's looking at like ecological crisis and like all these compounded like polycrises that like frame the present.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also am like asking the player or viewer to like step into this slightly psychedelic space, you know, where they're like becoming a moth or becoming a tree, and that's like such a strange.
Or becoming a coyote.
Coyote, yeah, or like I don't know, like in two of the levels you play as elements, so like you play as like water or you play as fire, you know. So there's just this really like strung out embodiment to it of like how do you like what's the collective intelligence of fire? Like how does it move? Like I don't know, like these are very interesting like mechanical questions in terms of building a game, but then they also have like deep philosophical and like existential questions too.
When we were having our conversation beforehand, there was something that really was like, I think a really important distinguishing description that you had about world building versus worlding.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting to me because when I look at artwork that's like created and constructed in the VR space, you know, there's this like level of interactivity. And so, you know, for the audience, like I was framing, okay, so what's the distinction? So can you share what your description was?
Yeah, no, I mean, like language really matters. Like,
Yeah.
like semantics matter, and like, I don't know, like Donna Haraway says, like it matters what words worlds. So it's like, it matters like what the language is that you're using to like create the world it is that you're imagining.
Yeah.
Because like language implicitly implies a voice, like it implies a speaker, like someone saying those words. So yeah, I mean, like, I think of world building, it's like a phrase that's been around for a really long time. Like historically, it's been tied to a lot of like, kind of like old school science fiction. So like William Gibson, like Neuromancer, or like, I don't know, like Star Wars, like Lord of the Rings kind of thing. It's like this like creation of like a cinematic universe, like inside of which you tell a story. And it has this like very kind of like sealed like outer edge. Like it's usually like a guy. Historically, it's always been like a white guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And or it's like a studio, but like they're like the studio is like following the direction of this one person, and it's like a static environment in a sense. Like it's a world that's like self-contained. Whereas like if you look at the origins of the term worlding, it's coming out of like Gary Asher Spivak's like essay, like Can the Subaltern Speak, which is this essay on like post-colonial theory and like the origins of like making worlds like through language and cartography, and it's sort of like looking at how like whoever has the words has the power, has the world. But then it's also looking at like Donna Haraway and like a lot of eco-feminists and like new materialist thinkers, like people who are basically like, the thing about like a world is it's never over, like it's always evolving and changing, and like it's fundamentally this like super open-ended system that's really
organic.
super organic. Like you don't really know where it begins or ends. As a player in the world, like you don't even really know where you end and like where the world begins. So it's this kind of like radical reimagining of the world as like something that's non-hierarchical and like just like collaboratively created. And that it's always evolving, and it's this like messy kind of project that we like all kind of hold together.
Can multiple players play your game at the same time?
Right now, the games that so the Illuvials is like the first video game I made.
Okay.
And yeah, like I made it as like a single player game.
Okay.
I kind of like in the pandemic I got really into like more like sort of indie games, and like when I say indie games I mean just like non-normative gaming, like a lot of games that deal with like grief or like ecological disruption or like queerness, like I don't know, just like a lot of like heavy kind of topics. And these are games often that like create this very meditative space that's like supposed to be experienced individually, right? Like it becomes this very kind of like introspective way of like understanding or processing trauma or like just your way of like moving through the world. So that's the kind of gaming that I was like responding to when I was making this project. But I mean, like I'm not opposed to like massively multiplayer online games. Like I really like actually the social dynamics. Like I still play like Second Life, you know?
Yeah.
Like I like that kind of chaos mode of like a world that's like co-created by other people. But I haven't actually made it myself because it's like it would be complicated in terms of like making the thing and like making it run online. Like that's like a multi-million-dollar operation.
Yeah.
To that scale. But yeah, I mean like one idea I sort of been thinking about for like a next project is like a game that requires like multiple people to play it in order to beat it. So it kind of like destroys this notion of the individual, right? Which is like has a very clear ecological implication.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because you're creating like a way in which the audience is interacting with your artwork. So what would be your hope for the piece that you're going to be positioning for LUMINEX? Like what is the takeaway that you'd love the audience to...
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, I feel like I'm really excited about what I'm showing LUMINEX because it's like a combination of the video game and the video piece. So the video work is like more of like a systems thing. Like it's looking at this whole kind of world, right? And then the game is like very personal. Like you're playing as like a wolf or you're playing as like wildfire, but it's always like the individual.
Yeah.
So in a way, this hybrid like 4-channel piece is a combination of both of those perspectives. So it's simultaneously seeing like the whole world, but it's also experiencing it in a really intimate way. And I feel like because the origin story of the work and the inspiration behind it was the city of LA, and the approach I'm taking is this sort of like non-human POV, right? Like playing as all these different characters. I basically just really want people to like walk away from it having a very different understanding of like how LA came to be.
So do you feel like the work that you're going to be doing at LUMINEX is like in some way going to help like to evolve like new works that we're going to see in this direction?
I mean, yeah, I feel like, you know, to this idea of like worlding, like it is just like another iteration or like another moment for the work to kind of evolve into something else. I mean, like all my projects take like, you know, like a year or so to like become a thing. So I like the idea that it can like branch off like a little like, I don't know, like mycorrhizal network, right? Like a sort of like underground root system where it can just like become all these many different things and like it's never really over or done. It just like always is changing and evolving. So yeah, I'm really excited to see like what people think. Like I mean, it's going to be like such an interesting experience. I'm so bummed that I can't be here in person.
You're going to be here virtually.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Existentially.
Yeah.
Spiritually. And
Well, thank you so much for doing this IG chat.
Yeah.
Sorry for the human disruptions.
Just like multi-species ensemble, it's great.
Exactly. That's very generous. I wanted to move it over to the chat. If anyone has any questions for Alice that they want to approach about Alice's work, about the work that Alice is doing at LUMINEX or anything that we've talked about, I'm going to just bring this a tiny bit closer so that I can do the chat. There's no questions. Are there any final comments or like anything that you want to share about like, you know, upcoming projects or which sound extremely interesting as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I'm not going to be here is because I'm basically having like a long European moment where I'll be doing a couple of residencies. Like the one I'm the most excited about is like at CERN, which is the Center for Nuclear Physics Research. It's based in Geneva.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I'll be looking into black holes and making a video game where you play as a black hole. So it's gonna be like really wild.
Where you play as a black hole.
Yeah.
You are the black hole.
Yeah. Well, you're simultaneously a black hole and a lichen. So it's looking specifically at micro black holes, which are so small it's impossible to prove they exist. So that's like what CERN is looking into right now. It's one of its main research streams. But I'm really interested, like it's a very new direction for me because like I feel like all my work is so like large scale and like about building these whole worlds. And like with this project, I'm looking at like the way in which like minimal forms of intelligence come to be, or like minimal forms of life exist. Like something so tiny that you can't even know if it's there for sure. And then the ways that lichens are like small planets, like they have like, you know, like multiple species kind of existing in the same body or the same organism, which also is true of us, by the way. Like we're mostly bacteria, like we're mostly not human. So I think, yeah, I mean, like there's interest, like, it's all about kind of disrupting this like this idea of like the human being apart from the world that we inhabit. But this is going to be a new direction because it's very focused on like the micro and like the tiny, and it's about this like paying attention to like life or intelligence that's so small that like you don't even know if it's really there,
but also extremely powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a black hole.
Yeah. That it can like wave us out, but you can't even see it, right?
Wow.
Like it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So there's going to be a lot more incredible art projects that this artist is going to be bringing to the table. So thank you so much. We're in South Park right now, so we thought it was appropriate to sort of bring Alice into the hood. Thank you, everyone. We're going to post the recording of this video on our Instagram, and if you have any comments, please send them over to info@nowartla.org. And we will be sure to direct them to the artist and make sure that your questions are answered. But we'll see all of you at LUMINEX.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks.
All right, take care.